My name is Emma, and for as long as I can remember, I've believed in two things: hard work and family. I was the kind of kid who would save her allowance instead of spending it on candy, who kept a piggy bank under her bed, and then as a teenager, I opened my first bank account and watched the numbers grow with a sense of pride I can't even describe. To me, money wasn't just paper or numbers, it was security, independence, and a ticket to a life where I could make my own decisions without anyone controlling me. By the time I was 29, I had worked hard in healthcare, taking extra shifts, weekends, holidays, you name it. I lived modestly, didn't indulge in fancy vacations, and was obsessed with saving. Every paycheck I got, I put a percentage away, slowly watching my savings account swell to $140,000. That number wasn't just money. It was my freedom. It was my future. It was everything I had worked so hard to build on my own. Of course, being the trusting daughter I was, I added my parents to the account years earlier. For emergencies only, I told myself, as if writing it down in black and white would protect me. I had watched too many family members struggle because of money, and I thought this was a reasonable safety net. My parents had always been a central part of my life. They had raised me, supported me, and I genuinely believed they would never cross the line. I trusted them probably more than anyone else in the world. I remember the last time I felt completely safe with that trust. I was 25 and I had just deposited my first large bonus into that very account. My dad had called that night to check in, and I told him about the deposit. He joked, "Don't forget about us when you become rich." I laughed, assuming it was the harmless teasing it always had been. I never imagined that the joke would one day feel like a threat. Life went on. I continued saving, planning, and dreaming. I imagined buying a house, traveling the world, even starting a small business of my own one day. And every month, I logged into my account and smiled at the growing number. It was a constant reminder that I was in control of my own destiny, that nothing could take away the security I had built with blood, sweat, and late-night shifts. I also naively believed that family always had your back. That love meant never taking advantage of each other. That loyalty was mutual. My parents weren't perfect, of course. My dad could be stubborn, my mom emotional at times. But I always assumed that when it came to money, boundaries were clear. I had made them clear myself. I was young, naive, and incredibly trusting, and that would cost me everything. Looking back now, I see how it started small. The occasional borrowed amount here and there. A check written, a transfer, minor withdrawals. Nothing I noticed immediately. And even when I did, I ignored it, convincing myself they wouldn't do anything that serious, that it was just a temporary fix for some family crisis. I believed in the idea of family more than in the numbers on a screen. I believed in them. I never once thought the day would come when I would log into my account and realize that the trust I had built for years had been shattered in a single moment of greed and betrayal. I never imagined that the people who gave me life could turn around and drain it in ways that felt intentional, calculated, and almost cruel. But that day came sooner than I expected. And when it did, I would learn that life doesn't always follow the rules you believe in. Sometimes, the people you trust most are the ones capable of hurting you the deepest. And that's exactly where my story begins, the day I realized my $140,000 wasn't just missing, but stolen by the people I called my parents. It all started on what I thought would be a completely ordinary Tuesday. I woke up, put on my scrubs, grabbed a coffee, and headed to work. Nothing felt unusual until the barista swiped my card and it was declined. At first, I laughed nervously. Must be a bank error, I muttered to myself, hoping the machine was just glitching. I tried it again at the next store. Declined. My stomach twisted. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. expecting a simple explanation, but what I saw made my heart stop on my balance. Was gone, not gone like a couple $100 missing, gone vanished. Thousands, hundreds of thousands. My eyes scanned the transactions, and my hands started to shake so badly I could barely hold the phone. And then I saw it. Withdrawals I didn't authorize. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Checks written in my name but signed with my signature. Every single one of them traced back to one common denominator, my parents. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself it was a mistake. Surely the bank had mixed up accounts. Surely my parents had a reasonable explanation. So I called my mom. I tried to keep my voice calm, steady, but it came out tighter than I wanted. Mom, did you? I hesitated. Did you use my money? There was silence. Then came the sigh, that deep, resigned sound she always made when she was about to explain something. Emma, we just borrowed a little, she said, almost like I would understand. It's for bills, for debt, for things we couldn't manage. I felt my stomach drop. A little? I had just seen tens of thousands disappear. The calm, rational voice I had trusted all my life was gone, replaced with excuses and casual entitlement. I tried to reason with her. Borrowed? Mom, this isn't borrowing. This is my life savings. This is my future. She deflected. You'll get it back eventually. We promise. You don't understand. I hung up numb. My hands shook so badly I couldn't even type a message. I felt sick. My mind raced. How long had this been happening? Months? Years? Did my dad know? My siblings? And most importantly, why didn't they ever tell me? I sat on my couch, staring at my bank statements, scrolling line after line of withdrawals and transfers. I couldn't believe it. Every emergency they claimed, every loan they promised to pay back, it was all a lie. And what hurt even more than the money was the betrayal. The realization that the people who raised me, who taught me about trust and integrity, had quietly stolen from me. The more I looked, the more I noticed a pattern. Small withdrawals first, then larger transfers, all timed so I wouldn't notice until it was too late. They had been planning this, or at least taking advantage of every opportunity. I felt violated, like my life, my independence, my very identity had been chipped away bit by bit. I remember thinking, almost in disbelief, how could someone do this to their own child? How could they betray the person they claimed to love most? I didn't know what to do. I wanted to confront them immediately, scream, demand answers. But a small part of me, maybe the part that still wanted to believe they loved me, hesitated. I didn't want to break the family apart. I wanted a solution. I wanted my money back. I wanted to believe it could still be fixed. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining the countless ways my savings had been erased, trips they never told me about, bills they had covered without asking, every secret they had kept. And I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Could the people who brought me into this world really betray me like this? By morning, I realized two things. First, this wasn't a small mistake, it was a pattern of deception. Second, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. It was the first day of the rest of my fight, and I had no idea just how far this battle would go or how much it would change me. I couldn't stay silent any longer. The next day, I drove to my parents' house with my hands shaking and my heart pounding so hard. I thought they'd hear it through the phone when I called. I rehearsed what I would say over and over, trying to stay calm, trying to sound reasonable. But the truth is, no amount of preparation could have readied me for what came next. When I arrived, my dad answered the door first. His expression was a mix of curiosity and mild irritation, like I was interrupting some important moment. My mom appeared behind him, giving me that small, almost imperceptible smile that usually meant everything is fine. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to cling to that illusion. Can we talk? I asked, keeping my voice steady, even though it felt like it was shaking on the inside. They invited me in, and I didn't sit. I couldn't. I was pacing, my eyes darting around, looking at all the familiar furniture, all the familiar surroundings that now felt alien and threatening. I pulled out my phone and, with trembling hands, showed them my bank statements. At first, there was silence. My mom glanced at the numbers, her lips pressed tightly together. My dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding my gaze. Then slowly, my mother sighed. "We just borrowed it," she said softly, as if repeating it enough times would make it true. "We needed it for bills, for emergencies, for things that couldn't wait." I laughed, though it sounded more like a sob. "Borrowed? Borrowed? Mom, this isn't borrowing. It's everything I've saved for years. This isn't a loan, it's my life, my future." My dad suddenly leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Emma, after everything we've done for you, you're really going to act like this? We raised you. We put food on the table. We helped you go to school. And now you act like we're criminals?" My stomach twisted. That was it. That was the line I could never unhear. They weren't even apologetic, they were angry. I was the problem. The audacity of it hit me like a punch. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about money. It was about control, about power, about making me feel guilty for daring to demand what was mine. I tried to argue, tried to reason. You can't just take money from me without asking. You can't manipulate me into feeling grateful for theft. My mom's voice grew sharp. You don't understand. We were doing it for the family. You're being dramatic. This isn't about stealing, it's about helping each other. Helping? Helping me lose everything I worked for? Helping me feel betrayed by the people I trusted most? I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. My chest burned, my throat ached. I felt like I was screaming into a void where my parents should have been. They didn't hear me. Or maybe they did, and it didn't matter. My dad shook his head. "You're so young. You think money defines your life, but you don't get it. Family is more important than money." I felt like I was suffocating. For years, I had lived by those exact words, valuing family, putting love above everything, but now I saw the truth. For them, family was a tool, not a value. They were gaslighting me, twisting the narrative, making me question my own anger, my own reality. I left their house that day feeling hollow, angry, betrayed, confused. My parents had always been my safe place, my refuge, but now every memory of trust, every shared laugh and advice felt tainted. I realized something painful. I could no longer depend on them. Not for money, not for honesty, not even for love. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, crying, shaking, and replaying every word. I felt a strange mix of grief and fury. Grief for the parents I thought I had, and fury for the life they had just tried to steal from me. It was the first time I truly understood the cost of betrayal. And it was the moment I decided that this wouldn't go unanswered. I wasn't sure how yet. I wasn't sure if I had the strength. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them get away. With this, the fight had just begun. The morning after the confrontation. I knew I couldn't sit around crying or replaying the argument over and over. I had to face the reality, even if it was unbearable. I grabbed my laptop and logged into my bank account again, hoping against hope that I was missing something. I wasn't. Every single withdrawal, every transfer, every check my parents borrowed had been meticulously documented. But it was worse than I expected. There were withdrawals I hadn't noticed, small ones at first, almost negligible. But over time, they had increased, getting bolder, braver, until they had emptied almost the entire account. My heart sank. I realized that this wasn't a few mistakes or misunderstandings. This was systematic theft. I made an appointment with my bank, needing answers, needing confirmation that I wasn't imagining it. I sat across from the banker, a calm woman named Karen, who listened quietly as I explained the situation. I tried to keep my composure, but my voice trembled, my hands shook, and tears threatened to spill over. Karen pulled up the account history and slowly, methodically walked me through the withdrawals. "These are legitimate transactions," she said gently, almost too calmly. "All of these are authorized by your account holders." I froze. Authorized? They were authorized by me. I didn't sign these withdrawals. Karen nodded. "It appears the signatures were forged. The checks were altered. There are multiple transfers that bypass standard withdrawal limits. And based on the timing and pattern, this was done intentionally. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Intentionally. My own parents had been siphoning away my money, line by line, over months, maybe years, and all the while, they told me it was for emergencies. Karen leaned in slightly, her tone professional but kind. "Emma, I hate to tell you this, but this qualifies as financial abuse and fraud. If this were anyone else, you would be filing a police report by now." I swallowed hard, the words barely registering. Fraud, financial abuse, crime. These weren't just abstract concepts. They were the reality staring me in the face. And the reality was that my parents had committed a crime against me. I left the bank numb, my hands clutching the statements like a lifeline. Outside, the sun was bright, the world moving as if nothing had happened, and I felt completely alone. I had spent my entire adult life building a life of independence, of security, only to have it stolen from me by the people I trusted most. Driving home, I thought about every time they had laughed off a financial discussion, every time they had minimized my concerns, every time I had ignored the red flags because I loved them. They had played me like I was naive, and the betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. When I got back to my apartment, I sat down and made a list. Every transaction, every withdrawal, every lie. I realized I had enough evidence to prove what they had done, enough to involve the authorities. And for the first time, the thought crossed my mind, maybe I don't have to forgive them. Maybe I don't have to pretend this is family drama. But even with that clarity, I felt a storm of emotions: fear, sadness, anger, disbelief. The people I had loved unconditionally were capable of something so deliberate, so calculated. And yet, there was also a strange sense of relief. Now I knew the truth. Now I knew the scale of the theft. I spent that night drafting emails, organizing statements, photographing checks. I wasn't just preparing to reclaim my money. I was preparing to stand up for myself, to confront the reality that this was bigger than hurt feelings or family disputes. This was a crime, and the sooner I accepted that, the sooner I could take action. That night, lying in bed, I felt something I hadn't in weeks: control. The trust I had in them was gone, yes. But what replaced it was a determination I had never felt before. I wouldn't let fear or guilt stop me. I wouldn't let my parents manipulate me into silence. Something had shifted. I realized that standing up for myself wasn't betrayal. It was survival. And with that thought, I knew my next step had to be official, legal, and undeniable. The fight was no longer just emotional. It was going to be real. After leaving the bank that day, I felt as though the ground had completely disappeared beneath me. I drove home in a haze, clutching my steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. My mind raced uncontrollably. How could this have happened? How could they do this to me? I didn't just lose money. I lost trust. I lost the belief that family was safe. I lost the sense that the world made sense. The $140,000 wasn't just numbers on a screen, it was my future, my independence, every plan I had ever made for myself. And now, it felt like someone had snatched it all away with cruel precision. When I got home, I collapsed on the couch and just stared at the ceiling. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from my mom and dad, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. They were probably sending excuses, apologies, or guilt-tripping messages. I didn't want to read them. I couldn't face them. I felt trapped in a nightmare where the people I loved had become my worst enemies. I remember the sinking feeling as I replayed every interaction I'd ever had with them. The small loans they'd asked for, the times they had subtly guilted me into helping them financially, they all added up in a way I hadn't wanted to see. And the worst part, I had ignored the signs. I had given them access, believing in the sanctity of family, believing that they wouldn't hurt me. I had been naive, trusting, and I hated myself for it. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched my phone and scrolled through my bank statements again. The numbers blurred before my eyes. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake the universe and demand justice. But I felt paralyzed, stuck in a strange limbo between anger and despair. I spent that night pacing my apartment, thinking about what I should do. Could I forgive them? Could I pretend this never happened? Could I just take it as a painful life lesson and move on? Every option felt impossible. Forgiveness felt like weakness. Silence felt like complicity. And doing nothing felt like allowing them to win. Somewhere deep inside, though, a flicker of determination began to burn. I realized that if I wanted to reclaim not just my money, but my sense of self, I had to act. I couldn't let this continue. I couldn't allow them to manipulate me further. I couldn't allow myself to remain a victim. But even as I resolved this, fear took hold. Going to the police? Reporting your own parents? It felt unthinkable. People always say family comes first. People always say you should protect your loved ones, no matter what. But what if protecting them meant losing yourself? What if it meant letting them steal from you with impunity? I remember sitting on the floor with my head in my hands, thinking about the person I had been before this happened, the naive, trusting daughter who believed in fairness, in honesty, in unconditional love. That girl felt dead. In her place, there was someone new, someone hurt, betrayed, but unwilling to be powerless any longer. I called a close friend late that night, someone I could trust. My voice cracked as I explained everything. She listened quietly, letting me cry and vent and scream. And then she said something I'll never forget. Emma, this isn't betrayal. It's abuse. You have every right to protect yourself. You're not doing the wrong thing by standing up for yourself. Sometimes love doesn't mean silence. Those words struck me like lightning. For the first time, I felt a strange mix of clarity and courage. Maybe I didn't have to feel guilty for taking action. Maybe I didn't have to let them manipulate me anymore. Maybe it was possible to fight back without becoming someone I hated. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, still shaking, still grieving, still terrified. But I also felt a small spark of resolve. I knew that the next step was going to be hard, painful, and irreversible. I knew it might destroy the last fragments of my relationship with my parents. But I also knew that if I didn't act, I would never be able to rebuild my life, and so I made the hardest decision of my life. I would go to the police. I would file a report. I would take the first real step toward reclaiming my life and refusing to be silenced or manipulated any longer. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about survival. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach that I couldn't untangle. Fear, guilt, and anger were all tangled together, making it hard to even get out of bed. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening. I couldn't continue letting my parents control me through fear and guilt. I dressed carefully, wore my most professional outfit, and gathered every piece of evidence I had. Bank statements, copies of checks, screenshots of texts, a detailed timeline of withdrawals, transfers, and all the suspicious activity. I had spent hours compiling it, and every time I looked at it, my hands shook. I knew that turning it over to the authorities meant the start of a process I couldn't control, and that terrified me. But I also knew it was the right step. When I walked into the police station, the sterile fluorescent lights made my anxiety worse. I sat at the front desk and explained my situation to the officer on duty. She listened without interruption, her face calm, professional, and patient. I felt my throat tighten as I spoke. I told her everything: how my parents had access to my savings account, how they had been withdrawing thousands over months, how they had forged my signature on checks, how they had lied to me, and how I felt utterly betrayed. For a moment, she didn't respond. I worried she thought I was overreacting, that I was just another kid fighting with her parents. But then she spoke, her tone measured, her words precise. "Emma, based on what you're telling me and the documents you've provided, this qualifies as financial fraud and abuse. This is a serious matter, and we will take it seriously. Thank you for bringing it to us." Her calm professionalism surprised me. I had expected shock, disbelief, maybe even judgment. Instead, I found validation. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't crazy. My parents hadn't just hurt me emotionally, they had committed a crime. And it wasn't my fault. The detective assigned to my case, Officer Ramirez, was kind but firm. He asked detailed questions. When did I notice the withdrawals? How often did they occur? Who had access? What explanations had they given me? And did I have any evidence of forgery? I answered everything honestly, even though it felt like opening old wounds. I handed over every document I had, watching him carefully log everything as the meeting progressed. A strange shift happened inside me. Fear was still there, yes, but it was being replaced by something stronger: control. For the first time, I was no longer just the victim. I was taking steps to reclaim my life, my money, and my dignity. Officer Ramirez told me that he would start an investigation and that they might need to interview my parents. He explained the process, how evidence would be verified, how charges might be filed, and how long it could take. Each word added weight to the reality of what I was doing, but it also made me feel stronger. I was no longer trapped in hopelessness. I had taken the first step toward justice. After leaving the station, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because I had done something proactive, something real. Apprehension because I knew the next steps would be emotionally brutal. My parents would find out. They would react. And my life, as I had known it, would never be the same. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, looking at the city lights through the window. The fear was still there, whispering doubts in my ear. Was I being too harsh? Was I wrong to involve the police? Would this destroy my family forever? And then I reminded myself of the truth they had stolen from me. They had lied to me. They had betrayed the trust I had given them unconditionally. And for the first time, I realized that protecting myself didn't make me cruel or ungrateful. It made me strong. I didn't feel vindictive yet. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking justice, and more importantly, I was seeking the reclaiming of my life. As I closed my laptop that night, I felt a strange sense of empowerment, a calm determination I hadn't felt in months. This was no longer about fear, sadness, or betrayal. This was about taking back control, and I wasn't going to stop until I did. The next step was inevitable. My parents would be confronted officially, and when that happened, there would be no excuses, no lies, and no avoidance. They were about to see that their actions had consequences, and that for the first time. I wasn't going to let them off the hook. The battle had officially begun. I had been bracing myself for this moment ever since I filed the report, but nothing could have prepared me for the chaos that followed. The day the police went to my parents' house, my phone rang nonstop. I could see the caller ID flashing my mom's name, the number practically vibrating off the screen. My heart pounded so hard I could barely answer. "Emma," she shouted, her voice shaking with panic. "They're here. The police. At our house." I stood frozen, phone in hand, a mix of fear, adrenaline, and vindication coursing through me. For years, I had been the one manipulated, the one guilted into silence, the one walking on eggshells to keep peace. And now, finally, the power had shifted. I didn't say anything. There was no victory in words yet, no smug satisfaction, just the quiet acknowledgement that this was real. My parents were finally being held accountable. I couldn't hear exactly what was happening over the phone, but I imagined it vividly. Officers walking up the driveway, knocking on doors, showing badges, asking questions. I imagined the panic in my parents' eyes as the realization hit them. This isn't a family talk. This is official. There are consequences. My mother's voice cracked again. "Emma, please. You have to tell them it's a misunderstanding." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My silence spoke volumes. I spent the next few hours glued to my phone, refreshing my messages obsessively. I didn't want to miss anything, but I also didn't want to engage. This was bigger than me now. It was the law. The justice system was finally stepping in, and I had to let it play out. Neighbors started calling me, whispering what they saw. One of them said, "I saw uniformed officers at your parents' door. They're taking papers and talking to everyone." Another mentioned the look on my father's face. He looked terrified. "Emma, you've never seen him like that." I felt a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. The same man who had scolded me for worrying about money, the same parents who had gaslighted me, who had dismissed my pain, were now facing the reality they had so carefully avoided. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel conflicted. I felt vindicated, but not in a petty way. It was a calm, profound sense of justice that hours later, my father called me, his voice unsteady, almost pleading. "Emma, please, can you make this stop? Can we fix this without all of this happening?" I swallowed hard, trying to steady my emotions. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him exactly how much pain he had caused, to make him feel even a fraction of what I had felt. But I didn't, because revenge, I realized, wasn't about making them suffer. It was about taking back my life. "I can't," I said quietly. "Not until you fix what you broke. Not until there's accountability." The rest of the day was a blur. Texts, calls, updates from the detective, neighbors reporting what they saw. I learned that the officers had documented everything, taken statements from both parents, and started the process of tracing all the stolen funds. They even mentioned the possibility of filing criminal charges. I remember sitting by my window that night, watching the city lights flicker, feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. My parents had underestimated me, underestimated the consequences of their actions, underestimated the fact that I was willing to fight for myself. For the first time, I felt like I had reclaimed a piece of my independence, my power, my voice. I didn't need them to apologize or even admit wrongdoing yet. What mattered was that the scales had shifted, even if only slightly. That night, I realized something important. The most satisfying revenge wasn't yelling or retaliation. It wasn't making them feel the pain I had felt. It was refusing to be manipulated, refusing to be silenced, and refusing to let them control my life anymore. The knock on their door had changed everything. It wasn't just a knock, it was a symbol of justice, of boundaries, of finally standing up to betrayal. And for the first time in months, I slept knowing that I was no longer the powerless daughter they could exploit. Tomorrow, the process would continue. The money might not be back immediately. The emotional wounds might not heal overnight. But the hardest part, the moment when I realized I was capable of standing up for myself, even against my own parents, was over. And that night, I felt something rare and precious: freedom. The days that followed the police visit were surreal. I wasn't constantly glued to my phone anymore, refreshing texts or imagining what my parents were saying. Instead, I focused on myself, my apartment, my work, my future. There was a strange calm in knowing that someone else, the law, was finally handling what I couldn't dot. It wasn't instantaneous. Recovery, both emotional and financial, takes time. The police began tracing my stolen funds, reviewing my parents' financial records, and verifying every check, transfer, and withdrawal. They spoke to me several times, patiently, professionally, guiding me through every step. Each conversation reminded me that I wasn't alone and that I had done the right thing by standing up for myself. The hardest part, of course, wasn't the paperwork or the police interviews. It was the emotional fallout, the realization that my relationship with my parents could never be the same. I had spent decades trusting them, loving them, putting their well-being above my own. And now I understood that love without boundaries can be dangerous. Their betrayal had been deliberate, systematic, and cruel. No apology could erase the months of deception, the stolen savings, or the emotional manipulation. But here's the thing I discovered. True revenge isn't about making someone else suffer. It's about reclaiming your life, your dignity, and your peace of mind. I realized I didn't need to yell at them, confront them in anger, or make them feel my pain. Justice had already been served the moment I refused to be a victim any longer. I began setting boundaries, firm, unshakable ones. I limited contact with my parents to necessary communications only. I blocked access to any financial accounts and closed old joint accounts that could be exploited. I changed passwords, secured my personal information, and put in place protections I should have had years ago. Every precaution felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming control over the life that had almost been stolen from me. In quiet moments, I reflected on the paradox of it all. The same people who had taught me the value of responsibility and hard work had tried to destroy the very foundation I had built. But in the process of standing up to them, I realized I had learned a far more important lesson. I had discovered my strength, my resilience, and my ability to protect myself even when the world or family betrays you. Friends noticed a change in me. I laughed more freely. I worked with more focus. I felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I could finally plan for my future again without the constant fear that someone I loved would turn it into a weapon against me. Weeks later, I received a call from the detective. My parents were cooperating under investigation, and there were possibilities of restitution and legal resolution. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel satisfaction in seeing them punished. I felt relieved. Relief that the law had recognized the injustice, relief that boundaries had been enforced, and relief that I had survived the betrayal stronger than I ever imagined. I thought about my story often, about the trust I had given, the pain I endured, and the courage it took to reclaim what was mine. I realized that life isn't about perfect families or unconditional forgiveness. Life is about protecting yourself, valuing yourself, and refusing to allow others, even those closest to you, to take what you've earned. Looking back, I don't hate my parents. I mourn the relationship I thought we had. I mourn the innocence I lost. but I also honor the person I became in the process. The one who could face betrayal, fear, and heartbreak, and still choose accountability over passivity, courage over fear, and freedom over loyalty to someone who had broken my trust. Finally understand something profound. The most powerful revenge is not anger or retaliation. The most powerful revenge is living your life fully, honestly, and without letting anyone control your destiny. Now, when I look at my savings, my career, and the life I've rebuilt, I don't see what was taken from me. I see what I fought for and what I refused to let anyone, even my parents, steal again. This story isn't just about money or betrayal. It's about learning to protect yourself, about reclaiming power, and about realizing that sometimes the hardest battles yield the most rewarding victories. And for me, that victory wasn't the money recovered, it was me, standing tall, unbroken, and free.